1, 2, 3.
1 to 3. That means we can't scream into the mic.
I mean, if we're screaming, then that's like...
I mean, like, if we're talking a little bit too loud, like, and are laughing.
I guess so.
Oh, well, we'll just make sure we don't laugh too hard.
Don't laugh.
No comedy.
Uh-oh.
Stinky.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jesaya.
And I'm William.
And we're back at you again with the Voice of the Vault podcast. This episode sponsored by nobody.
Did you really have to go with the sponsor? I thought we settled that was super cringe last time.
It's not that bad of an idea, is it? Okay, we're redoing it. Anyways, in all seriousness, this is the Voice of the Vault publication, McMaster University's Meme and Media podcast. And today's episode is about video games, and more specifically, my research into video games.
Wow, you do research?
Yes, actually, I do research.
It's almost like your faculty is almost scientific.
Almost, but not really, because it's video games. Let's be real. It's video games, man.
Fake scientist.
It's not fake science, dude. I'm working with the psychology department.
Very nice. Anyway, so tell me about your research. What do you do?
Okay, well, I guess the preface is that my research is kind of weird.
I know.
I mean, yeah, typically you don't see much research into video games from like what we're talking about, and basically what I'm working with is narratives in video games. Mm-hmm. Essentially what we're trying to do is, or what Dr. Stephen Brown, who is my research coordinator, what he's trying to do is see if you can create a psychological model of plot that can go cross mediums. Mm-hmm. So we've got a team working with music, for example, and film and novels, and then there's me, really far behind everyone else, because video games is actually really difficult to categorize as a narrative experience.
Very nice. And just a quick question: this Stephen Brown, is he like an old man?
Yeah, okay. Funny thing about that, actually. First time I went into his office, right? It was me, Carmen, my coordinator, and Dr. Brown. He said to me, "Okay, so you're doing video games and narratives, and I don't really know what that's all about. The last time I played a video game was Pong," and I was like, "Oh."
So this guy's like a okay boomer type of dude.
Yeah, he is a boomer, 100%.
Oh, because I was thinking I know another Stephen Brown, and he's also a doctor, but he used to work at University of Ottawa, and he also works in psychology. So I was
for real?
Yeah, so I was kind of confused for a second. He reviews fountain pens. That's why.
That's quite weird, actually.
So I was just like, are you working for my homeboy?
Is the other Stephen Brown also a boomer but doesn't know anything about video games?
Nah, he's 30 something.
Oh, okay. Well, my prof is in his 50s, and
that's not a boomer.
50s to 60s? Yeah.
My dad is 50s to 60s. He's not a boomer. I
mean, okay, the meaning of the boomer meme is kind of been conflated at this point, because real boomers are in their 70s, to be honest. And
okay,
most of us, when we're saying okay boomer, we're not actually speaking to 70-year-old people that went through the 50s and 60s.
Okay. Anyways, back to the topic.
Yeah.
Boomer.
Okay. Well, anyways, what did you want to know about the research?
What the heck is going on? As in, how is that even valid?
I think probably the most. Yeah. One of the things that was one of my questions, actually. Why am I doing this? Because looking at if a plot model can work in video games is kind of just weird. Why would he do this? And the answer he gave me was, we don't know. Basically what he likes to do in his labs is ask questions that no one else in the studies have asked before.
Yeah. And
then create research questions out of those fields.
Yeah.
So right now we're not currently sure if anything can come of this, but as we push forward and see what we can do, new paths start to open up, and then we can start to investigate those things.
Pathfinder. You're a Pathfinder.
Yes, a Pathfinder.
But also, so what kind of questions did you manage to come up with?
So far, I don't have any research questions. My main stuff has been focusing on creating a comprehensive taxonomy for video games, like how to explain them to Dr. Brown or someone who else who hasn't had experience with video games, which has been kind of challenging. I've had to go through a lot of like literature and stuff, but we're slowly getting there. I think the ultimate question is, can we adopt this structure of psychological structure of narrative into a video game perspective? And I think the most challenging thing about that actually is the fact that video games have choice. The thing about video games is that they are an interactive media, right? So when you take a look at, for example, a book or a movie, when we're trying to map the psychological structure of a protagonist's motives in a story, almost all the time the viewer is not involved with that, right? You're just passively watching a series of events that are going on, and you're taking that in, but ultimately your psychology has nothing to do with the psychology of the person that's in the story. In a video game, that dynamic changes entirely, because suddenly you are embodying that person in the game.
Not always.
Well, not necessarily always, but you can, right? In a large number of narrative games, you are actively in the boots of the main protagonist. Like, name a story game where you aren't simultaneously spectating cutscenes of a character, right? But also controlling them in the world.
Well, for one game that comes to mind is, I'm not sure if this fits your definition, but in Final Fantasy 7, because that's the latest one I played, Cloud is its own character, has its own personality. You merely make choices for him.
Exactly.
But it does not pertain to his personality at all, and your psychology and his psychology do not match. You're merely acting through him. You're not acting for him.
That was actually a distinction that we made in the study. There's different levels of transportation and embodiment that you can have of a character. So you can be totally synced up with a character, as in that character is essentially you in that world. But you can also have characters that are in conflict with your own goals and interests, right? So a character like Cloud that is previously contextualized in a story, he has his own motivations and desires, right? But you as the player also have your own set of motivations and desires. So the way these two things interact makes the actual way that a story goes in a video game much more difficult to map out than it would be with...
but not when the story is completely linear.
Yes, when a story is completely linear, it's very easy to map out, right? But as soon as you start having options, it becomes like difficult.
The only thing options related to Final Fantasy is your build choice, but the story progresses all the same.
Wait, what was that about, like making choices for Cloud though?
You act through him. The most choice you have is choosing how you play the game. But then the story is linear. You go here, defeat this big baddie, and you move on to the next area.
That's not something that is like disaccounted in what I'm saying, because like actually we're going to be starting by looking at the most linear games, because those will almost always line up most with other things like film and books, right? Because it's linear, right? You're not moving through this, you're not negotiating choices in the story. You're just following what the writer has intended, right?
Same for these plot-driven RPGs.
Exactly. But when you get to more complicated things like your Skyrims or Fallouts, right, where you are making up a character, or you are embodying a character that is already kind of been contextualized in the world, but isn't really, like, for example, when you wake up in Fallout New Vegas, you're a courier that has amnesia, right? You're technically already in the world, but like you can do whatever you want, right? When it comes to those things, the model of figuring out how a plot is supposed to be structured is very difficult, because when you have an open world, for example, right, how do you structure that? It's not, you can't say there's a line to it, or there's a set number of paths, because you can negotiate it however you want, right?
Well, in that case, wouldn't it be more reasonable to have something like if we were to graph it on like a plot, have one overarching plot and then subplots in between?
That's what I was actually considering. So my main idea for open world games was that you'd usually in an open world game there's a main storyline, right, that you follow. That would probably be the main trajectory that the plot line would follow, but I would put it in like a dotted line, for example.
Yeah.
That can be interrupted at any time by any number of side quests.
And I'm not saying interrupted. I'm saying two independent plot lines.
Oh.
So something like, give me this paper. Something like, what I'm going to draw here, folks, is a graph where you have a parabolic shape, a negative parabolic shape, indicating the overarching plot, and then a separate line right here.
That would indicate like other plots.
Other plots. Whereas, so what it's trying to say is that at the end of the day, you're going to reach the same spot.
Yeah.
This is the overarching plot, but then you're doing different stuff inside.
We were definitely considering things like this as well, but the problem gets like kind of weird when you've got a game where you've got, let's say, like 15 or 16 endings.
Yeah.
Suddenly you've got a very convoluted like graph, right?
Yeah.
It becomes very difficult to figure it out. Plus, for example, let's say it's an open world game where you can choose the side quests that you go on.
Yeah.
If you have a game like that, suddenly the actual shape of the line changes with every playthrough.
Yeah.
Right. So you've got a potentially like limitless number of different ways that you can negotiate the story.
Why not have a 40, not 40, but a graph that has negative values, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have your endings in each one. Each one has a specific trajectory. Then you have a scatter plot of choices, and then depending on your choice, you generate a line which gives you a p-value.
That could actually also work, but I haven't actually considered that. I'll pass that on to my research instructor. Well, anyways, those were the types of things or concerns that we had with games.
Yeah.
Right. And actually, another set of concerns is like non-narrative games.
Yeah.
How do you approach games like that?
Yeah. Non-narrative games, as in they're just strictly for gameplay.
Yeah.
Then I feel like that falls outside of the whole entire model.
But there's also games that kind of like fringe in between the two, right? For example, one thing that we noticed was in Pac-Man, right?
Yeah.
You might consider that a very ludocentric, and that is to mean gameplay-centric type of game, right? It's just you controlling this figure, going around and eating pellets, right?
Yeah.
But it also follows a basic trajectory of a plot line where you have a goal. You start off at the bottom, things get progressively more difficult, and ultimately you lose. So we would call this a, I guess kind of like a mountain shape where it goes up and then down. Ultimately you lose in the end. So it's technically, from a story perspective, kind of, like sad.
Yeah.
I guess like a bad ending. A bad ending is a way of putting it.
Okay.
But yeah, it's like little things like that can kind of throw off the model because you're trying to create like something that covers everything.
Yeah.
But it becomes difficult when you start to look at these little like complexities.
Yeah.
One thing I found interesting actually about the whole dynamic of a video game is that it kind of everything in video games lies on kind of a spectrum. Where let's say on the left you have gameplay, or game, and on the right you have narrative, right?
Yeah.
Typically, when you get to games that are extremely narrative, extremely hyperlinear, right?
Yeah.
It often loses a lot of the gameplay elements, right?
Yeah.
Because you've got things like cutscenes, cinematography, all that sort of stuff that interrupts the actual natural flow of a game, right? Whereas when you have a totally gameplay-centric game, like, I'm trying to think of a good example that doesn't evoke a story. I guess
Doom. Or the original Dooms.
But even Doom
they have
has
a very loose narrative. It's like man goes to hell, is too angry to die. But like you're playing it because you get to shoot down demons.
I'm thinking even more gameplay centric, like Pong. Like you cannot take a story out of that. Yeah. Like what? How do you take that as a story?
Pong the anime.
Exactly. Well, no, actually, no. Don't make this an anime.
Yeah.
Ping pong is pretty good though.
Yeah.
Anyways, when you get onto that side of things, there's no narrative content that you could pull from that, right? Everything kind of lies on that spectrum between totally narrative and totally non-narrative. It's interesting. And it's one of those things I've been trying to work through.
Yeah. So trying to reconcile that dichotomy into something that's very holistic.
Yeah. that dichotomy was enough to be able to encompass all games.
Yeah.
Right? But it wasn't specific enough for me to start mapping out individual games. That's where I'm currently at. I think I have a model that I'm interested in, but I can report on that a little bit later.
Have you, just for the folks who don't know, I'm a bioinformatics background, and the way we handle stuff like this is using the database management.
Mm-hmm.
So it could all be under the same overarching model with different subcategories.
Right.
So what we have on, for example, my work is that we have different ontology models for different categories that we'd like to use. So you can have something similar for you categorize sub-models for RPG, for different genres that all fit in their own unique way to the overarching model.
But that's a good idea, and I've tried to push things like that before.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's like they want a cohesive singular model, right?
That's a bit hard.
Exactly, right? Because like you can break it down into genres and figure out how to, write for individual storylines, and that makes it really easy, right?
So why don't you start by can you start off with laying the ground rules and adding exceptions to understand?
Yeah, I think that's generally what we've been doing. So basically, how the plot model works currently is that there's like you start with like a graph, right? And on one end you have 1 point, that's your beginning point, and your end point, right? And in that graph, it's called a harmonic model because it kind of goes like a sine or cosine wave. The plot can go however you want through it, right?
Yeah.
But it ends up at with a beginning and an end, right? And there are distinct points where player or protagonist psychology influences choices and actions which move the story forward or backwards, right? Like those things I was talking to you about earlier, like linear versus non-linear, the structure of the game world, whether that be like sandbox, open world, linear box. Like all of these things kind of are exceptions to that model, unless you're talking about a like extremely linear, one-dimensional game that's almost akin to a film, right? Yeah. Like,
which is most RPGs.
Well, not most RPGs because JRPGs for sure. Yeah. 100% JRPGs.
And folks, like I specialize in JRPGs.
Yeah.
Because that's the only type of games I play.
But if we're talking about like a more open world, like the RPGs I mentioned, Skyrim, Fallout. Yeah. They're very multimodal in the way that you can approach them. Yeah. Right. So it becomes much more, I guess, challenging to look at them. Yeah. I think we have maybe time for one more question or one more thing to look at before we have to wrap up.
Yeah. I'm just thinking. Give me this. Why don't we have I'm thinking of like hidden Markov models, but like at each point in here, right? There's the various quests that you can do. Right. And where you lay here and the psychology of the person playing, right? The statistical score for where it goes, right? And then using that, you map a p-value, how close it sticks to the harmonic model.
For those of you, obviously, who can't see what just went on, he kind of put dots around the sine wave that I drew, which represented individual quest modules, and you would create an average or statistical average that would see how closely that would represent.
And I'm thinking of like hidden Markov models, which normally you do with computers, right? Where it shows you the likelihood of the next thing occurring, given using statistical averages, where you need lots of n's, so lots of player-based logging their decisions, thinking if you finish this quest, what's the likelihood that you move on to this quest? Right, given within the constraints of the psychology of the patient, right?
Good question.
And using that statistical value, you can calculate at which quest they would go, and then map out potential plots through bootstrapping to see how it matches along with the harmonic model.
Typically, how would you go about doing that type of study, though? Would that just be a lot of user data?
A lot of user data, and then computed using using like, let's say like 100, maybe 100, and then as your training set, and then you would use a computer to just do it again and again and again and see how your data comes out.
Hmm.
And each time the data comes out, you re-put that back into the training set, or you increase your initial n value, which is the amount of data you get.
These are things that I think would be actually pretty interesting to consider. They might actually yield a much more realistic model. But I have almost no experience with bioinformatics or
it is not bio, it's just mostly statistics.
Well, I have very little experience with statistics in your case.
It became less, this whole entire podcast became less of me asking you questions, but like as long as the viewer knows and me suggesting things that might work, which also tends to can be interesting. I'm not sure if you like that, but
I think it sounds interesting. I'll try to.
So my suggestion here is keep doing what you're doing, but also like look into statistical models and a little bit of, just statistics. It's mostly statistics, and you can probably get some other like science guy to do it, or like computer scientist to do it. Statistics is how I think you want to go through here, because a lot of it is probability. If we can chalk up human decision to probability making, then it simplifies a lot more, because it puts a number to what's usually unknown.
That's definitely useful.
Yeah.
Anyways, guys, that was basically all the time that we have for today's podcast. Sorry we couldn't talk about more. Although it was very interesting.
Yeah.
I think moving forward, there's a lot of things I'd like to borrow from statistics that would probably make my work a lot easier.
Yeah.
Anyways, for those of you that are watching, thank you all for listening. If you like this podcast and want to hear more of it, you can check out our YouTube channel. Or if you'd like to publish with us and get your opinion out there, you can check out our website, Vault Publication, www.thevaultpublication.com. I think that's all for today. We're going back to the Song of a Day model that we had before, because I thought that was pretty cool. And William here has the song for us.
Yeah, it's a game I played recently called Code Vein, and it's one of the tracks that I really like called Memories of the Lost. Send us an email telling us what you think.
Well, anyways, we'll put it in. See you all around. God bless.
God bless.